This is a story from my childhood. Did you ever have the experience of being at home alone as a kid, and someone would knock on the door, and you would drop to the floor to hide to avoid being seen? I was around 7, and my older cousin was 12. Our parents were going out for the night, and my cousin was going to be the babysitter since she was 12. They ordered a delivery pizza for us kids. After it arrived, they reminded us not to open the door for anyone, showed us the telephone numbers again, and took off. We were playing air hockey in the basement when we heard the doorbell. My cousin told me to stay in the basement, and as he crept up the stairs, the doorbell became incessant, being pushed over and over again. My cousin looked back at me and put his finger to his lips, signaling me to remain quiet. He quietly snuck up to the door, peeked through the peephole, and dropped white like a ghost. The ringing stopped, and I got up the courage to ask what he saw. He said it was a man dressed all in black, hiding his face, and he was holding something new.
Maybe it's a package delivery.
I queried.
No, a delivery man would have just rung the bell and left it. And besides, it's pretty late for a delivery.
The ringing stopped, and all went silent. Our fear quickly evaporated, and we went back to playing. It didn't seem important to call our parents. It was over after all. But then we froze in alarm. This time there was a pounding on the glass window. We got down on our hands and knees and swiftly moved into the kitchen out of sight of the window. The banging was getting louder and louder, and I was petrified. My cousin took a baseball bat from the kitchen hall closet where sports equipment was stored. He crawled past me and put his fingers to his lips again as he approached the doggy door. It was unlatched and big enough for a man to crawl through. He locked it with the bolt, but it was a loud click, and the man outside heard it and went berserk. The banging became more violent and erratic as he threw himself practically at the door. Abruptly, the pounding stopped, and he paced back and forth on the wooden porch with heavy boots. The boards creaked under his weight in a steady creak, creak, creak with each step. Then, that stopped in an eerie silence. A man's voice called out, "Open the door. I have a package." We huddled on the floor in silence, our hearts pounding. The man called out again, "I know you're in there. Open the door. I have a package. If you don't open the door, I'll open it for you." The pounding on the door was so violent the whole house seemed to shake. At this point, my cousin gathered his wits, snatched the phone off the table, and dialed the police as our parents had instructed.
911. The unit is on the way. Would you describe the intruder?
Both my cousin and I peered out a side window where we would not be seen trying to answer the dispatcher's question. Big mistake. Before this night, I did not know that pure evil existed. I had an idyllic childhood, but that night, I looked directly into a man's eyes that had no soul. We were eye to eye with something unhuman and so demonically possessed. This unnatural beast looked directly back, smiled a twisted grin, moved closer to the window and said, "Don't you want your mail? Open the door. I can give it to you." I grabbed my cousin's arm, and we shook so hard we could barely stand. My cousin shouted,
We had called the police.
and with that, the man turned and ran into the darkness. The police arrived a few minutes later, and our parents not long after. The demonic man had vanished into the night and was never caught. To this day, every time the doorbell rings, this chilling nightmare pulses through my veins that the mystery package delivery demon is back. The last few years have been difficult for many. COVID-19 took my grandmother, and I was stuck home my senior year of high school, taking classes via video conference like most of the nation. It really messes with your head after a while, but I knew I'd see my girlfriend again after all this blew over, which was reassuring. We had been close since middle school, and by junior year we were crazy for each other. We kept it on the down low because her parents were super traditional and objected to her having a boyfriend. The most crucial test of our love was dealing with COVID restrictions, and that her family moved to another school district during the pandemic, which was our junior year. We made the most of the situation by staying in contact by telephone, often talking all night. We both had computers in our rooms and could video chat. We could only meet face to face a couple times in the winter of our senior year. In a way, being quarantined worked well for us. We did our homework together and chatted all day uninterrupted by our parents, especially hers, who knew nothing about our relationship. Secretly, I was a little worried about our relationship because we had no time together during this 2-year lockdown. One afternoon, she informed me her father and mother were being recalled to their offices and could no longer work remotely as they had the last 2 years. Our schools were also going to lift our stay-at-home schooling in the next several weeks, but for now, we were still at home studying. The following week, our big opportunity came. Her parents were back in the office, and my parents took my dad's car and would be gone all day. That left my mom's car in the garage. So I borrowed it without saying and drove the 30 miles to my girlfriend's house. She was home alone when I arrived. She greeted me and practically dragged me in the door. We were both laughing with the anticipation of adolescent love. We had several hours of play and had dressed and were making a snack in the kitchen when her dad walked into the kitchen. He saw me standing there with his daughter and went into a rage. He was yelling at me things like,
"Who are you? What are you doing here with no one home? What have you done to my little girl?"
Now, in his defense, he knew nothing about me as we had kept our relationship a secret for almost 3 years now. Our relationship hadn't been very typical with the pandemic and her fears of her dad not allowing her a boyfriend in the first place. We tried to explain the situation, but her father was out of his mind, furious, and wouldn't listen for a second. He looked at his daughter, with his eyes bulging, and then glared at me, coming so close I could feel the heat of his breath. Everything kinda went off the track at this moment. Her father's expression was intimidating, his voice quivering loud.
"What are you up to? What have you been doing? Did you put your hands on my daughter?"
I didn't move a muscle or risk saying a word. He moved toward his daughter and demanded, "Did he force himself onto you?" She responded that we had been in love since grade school. With that reveal, he knew exactly what had been going on, and I knew by his anger precisely what was coming. I turned to run, but he was as fast as lightning. He grabbed me by my shirt and, wrapping his fingers around my neck, hoisted me off the ground. With clenched teeth, he breathed on me and said,
"Listen to me and listen good. I don't care if you met when you were in diapers or for however long you say it is. You will leave this house and never, and I mean never, contact my little daughter again. If I ever catch you, I'll kill you."
He dropped me to the kitchen floor and screamed with his entire body, "Get out!" I was in my mother's car driving in seconds. I slowed when I was a couple of miles away. My body was trembling, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. When I got home, I shut myself in my room, locking the door. After a few hours, I was calmer and checked my voicemail for any messages. There were none. I fell asleep but woke as terrified as ever, having had that chilling nightmare running endlessly through my sleep. I have no doubt that he would kill me. I truly looked into the eyes of evil. Both my mother and father were doctors and worked rotations at the hospital. That meant as a freshman in high school, I was often home alone. It didn't bother me as we had a nice house with lots of areas to roam. 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a large basement, and a 3-car garage with a television room above. I actually loved staying home alone, and my parents gave me a lot of independence as I was mature for my age and very responsible. Our house was out of town in a rural area that was rapidly being developed, but for now, it still had a county feel. My parents chose that area because the crime rates in our city were high, whereas in the surrounding farm areas it was very safe. Unfortunately, as new homes developed, crime followed, and that is where this story begins. I came home from school and my parents were at work. They were doing double duty with a spike in COVID-19 related cases in our city. I can put a pizza in the oven and play video games with my friend from school. We played several games before it got late, and we both knocked off for the night with plans to meet up in the morning. After sleeping about 3 hours, I was awakened by a noise from the kitchen. Cupboards opening and closing, plates clattering, as if someone was rooting around with no care. Not remarkably quickly, just carelessly. Looking at my clock, I saw it was 1 a.m. Mom and Dad wouldn't be home for another several hours. I slipped into my house slippers, cautiously went downstairs, and silently peered into the kitchen. Standing at the open refrigerator was a woman. Her back was to me, so she wasn't aware of me spying on her. She was a homeless-looking person, with dirty, ragged clothes. She was skinny, and her bones showed through her shirt. I didn't know what to do, but since she looked like a drug addict or someone not mentally correct in their brain, I crept back upstairs to my room to get my cell phone to call the police. But when I got to my phone, it was dead. This only happens when you need it. I didn't want to go back down the stairs, so I climbed out the window and down the trellis, and ran to a neighbor's house. Despite the late hour, they were awake and came to the door and let me in. I explained there was an intruder in the house, and they called the police and my parents at the hospital.
911.
The police arrived within minutes, and within a few more minutes, came out of my house with a dirty woman in her 30s in handcuffs. She wasn't fighting or anything, and didn't appear to be resisting arrest in any way. But according to the police, she was a known person with a dangerous past. She had recently been released from state custody and returned to the area and had been breaking into homes on this side of town. They had been on the lookout for her for several days. The police advised my dad that as the area grew, he should consider installing an alarm system and security cameras with night sensors. This, my dad did the next day practically. But the story doesn't end here. A couple of days after the event, I was sitting with Mom, and I brought up the night the woman broke into our house. She got a little worry in her eye, and remember, my mom is an emergency room doctor, and few things can rattle her, and she said,
"Your dad and I were going to tell you, but I thought we should wait for a little."
The night we spoke with the police after the arrest, the police told us that when they captured the woman, she was on the second floor, standing at the locked bedroom door. She was holding a knife above her head. It was found to be the butcher knife from the woodblock in the kitchen. Things would have been very different if I had decided to go down the stairs that night, instead of out of my window.